Hey everyone, we're trying something a little bit different with the microphone today, so tell me how it sounds. Today we're going to be talking about mascot horror, which I personally don't enjoy, but I am very interested in. I think it's interesting. It's fascinating. And what interests me about it is actually the fact that I don't personally like it that much, because that means it's effective. I don't like being scared. I don't like being surprised, both of which horror likes to do. So if it's capable of scaring me, if anything, that means it's doing its job. That's good. And I want to talk about how that applies to like the genre as a whole and some specific examples of it that I've seen, as well as where it doesn't work as well. Like I don't know how many of you regularly partake in mascot horror, but if you've played video games at all in the last like decade, you probably know about FNAF. Okay, sounds good. Like I don't personally like FNAF at all. I do not enjoy watching it. I don't enjoy playing it. But why this is so interesting to me, in this case, that's a good thing because the goal of horror is to scare you. So if it's scaring you, that means the game is doing something well, or the book or whatever it is. But in this case, we're talking about games. I personally don't like being scared, but that's okay. That just means it's not for me. And I think that's an important distinction to make because I've seen people talk about whether they personally enjoyed or didn't enjoy something. And that's fine, that's subjective, but that's a little different from like, did this thing that we're looking at accomplish its goal? Like, I don't have the same sense of humor as everybody. Like, I don't I don't really like gallows humor, for example, like dark humor, but some people do. And if like a movie can make people who enjoy that laugh with that kind of humor, that's good. That means it's doing its job. So the whole idea of like toys or cutesy things being scary, like haunted dolls or whatever, I think that's existed like as long as there's been humans just have like primal fears and stuff. But the overall thesis of mascot horror is like take something obviously like a mascot that's supposed to be cute and friendly and make it very scary and dangerous. Like in real life, I don't like that. I need some things to be just cute and cuddly. But that's not like that doesn't mean anything's wrong with the genre. It again, I don't personally like it, but the fact that it's able is to create this discomfort by contrasting something we know is supposed to be safe with something very, very not safe and frightening. That's a really unique kind of horror that's interesting to me. Like, I'm pretty sure if any of us went to like Chuck E. Cheese as a kid, the animatronics probably freaked us out, but like they weren't really haunted, at least not as far as I know. So it's interesting to see someone take this experience that so many people have had and create like a whole story out of it. Like 17 games and a movie and endless merch, which is crazy. It's really interesting to me just how big of an impact the FNAF games have had on their genre or subgenre or whatever it is, just because it's such a huge impact and in such a relatively short time, video games haven't even existed for that long. Computers are less, at least as we know them now, are less than 100 years old. Like Chuck E. Cheese or other kinds of play places, even if they freaked us out, like we know they're supposed to be a safe place. That makes sense. They're for kids. They're supposed to be for fun. So if you take that and you make it dangerous, you make it a place where kids are getting hurt and like the adults are there, but they're not really helping or they're making it worse, that's uncomfortable. That's scary. So that I think that's really effective. I don't think FNAF really did this, but something I find interesting about Bendy and Poppy Playtime is that they both use like Christian imagery. Like, if you haven't seen this, look it up. There's like this part where the heavens open and the rays of light shine down, and the prototype like sticks its hands down. And, I don't know if I can say exactly what it does, but it, it takes catnap. It reminded me of like a divine hand, or how people say that like the heavens light is shining down. And obviously in Bendy you have the whole thing where Sammy Samerson, I know that's not his name, but I like poking fun at him. He's like, "Can I get an amen, everybody?" We've got whole songs about that. And I'm curious about why the imagery is being used. Like, I know Bendy is a little demon, but I wonder, like, what's the reason for that? And does it mean something? Like, why are we using this imagery in particular? Especially in Poppy Playtime, which doesn't have that demon imagery. It's like, was this intentional or was it like subconscious? Like, what are you going to say with like a whatever, like biologically haunted toy factory that does not have a demon motif and is just toys, but there's still slight influences from Christianity? What are you going to say with that? Is it going to be like that thing, like with the blood and the wine and the flesh is the spread, but it's literal? I don't know. But that takes me to another point about Bendy, which is it does not scare me at all. I had this weird epiphany last week where I was thinking about Ink Bendy, and I was like, wait, that's supposed to be scary. This model is supposed to instill fear in me, and it's literally never done that. Like, when I look at the design of regular Bendy or Ink Bendy or the backgrounds, any of the characters, any of the stuff that's supposed to be scary, it does not scare me. And if I have a reaction, it's more like, hey, I recognize this art style. This is very clearly harkening back to the early days of animation in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. Bendy's got a very simple design with a mask face and noodle limbs because it's easy to draw. I like learning about the history of animation. It's an interest I have, so that's how I kind of connect to it. I think it's interesting, like the idea that all these creatures were brought to life and then they got left behind. And they've just been hanging out there and they want revenge. It's hard to blame them, but they're taking it to extremes. So that's what I find interesting about it. But the fact that it's not scaring me, even as it's using stuff that's supposed to be cute and friendly, like cartoons, like instead of Chuck E. Cheese or toys, here it's cartoons. And that's the dissonance isn't really causing me fear or discomfort at all. And I don't think that's a good sign because this game is a horror game. It's trying to be scary. So if it's not doing that, it's failing at an important goal. And I'm not entirely sure why at the moment. I might have to like analyze that more. But I wonder if it has to do with just being interested in the history of animation. Like, if someone saw these creatures and they weren't geeking out, like, oh, I recognize this art style, I recognize why these principles are being used, et cetera, would they be more scared? If like a monster just jumped out and started chasing them, they didn't geek out over it, would it scare them more? I wonder if too some of this comes from a lot of Bendy being a happy accident, and it's not necessarily a criticism, like it's a thing that just affects the game. Like originally Bendy wasn't even supposed to be there as far as I can recall. The Meatly just thought, just wandering around these abandoned rooms isn't that scary. We should put a monster in there. And then it kind of snowballed. And I wonder if the whole idea of cartoons plus horror had been come up with beforehand, it had been like dug into and planned out. People thought like, what makes cartoons comforting? How can we make that scary? Or what influences went into making them? Maybe we could use that to affect the story world. like, do we want it to take place in the real world with, like, the real world influences that created these cartoons? Or maybe they're magical and they live in a world that just looks like that. When you're making things up as you go along, it doesn't always give you time to use foresight and make things, like, as scary or as complex as they need to be. I'm really happy that so many real world things helped make this game popular, like the amount of music people made, or the cameo from Jacksepticeye. And it's cool to see how much the community got involved, but like that's not a substitute for the game like doing its job and being scary. And another reason I've seen people get interested in it is just the story or the atmosphere. They aren't really scared by it either. So if that's the case, that's another reason I would say plan this out ahead of time, like flesh out your characters more, make the story more complex and not just a bunch of like fetch quests.